Well, welcome. We do have a few more stragglers coming in, so when they come in, we'll try and make room for them. For those of you guys who don't know me, my name is Dr. Ross. Welcome to the clinic. Tonight we're talking about nutrition, what I call Nutrition 101, which is really, it encompasses a lot of different parts of nutrition, but specifically it talks about blood sugar. And when we talk about blood sugar, we're talking about probably the most part of nutrition. If you can control your blood sugar, you can control your metabolism. You can control your energy. You can control your weight and weight control from that side, either gaining weight or losing weight. Blood sugar is at the main core of that. But more than that, blood sugar is at the core of inflammation. So when we have blood sugar that's even slightly out of control, we create inflammation in our body. And really it boils down to acidity. So we create acidity, which equals inflammation in the body. So if you look at any disease that we have, from diabetes, heart disease, cancer, a whole host of other diseases, blood sugar and sugar toxicity is really at the center of it. And Yale University just did a study, and they showed that out of all the successful diets out there, so these are diets to help people lose weight, all of them were glycemic control diets, or in other words, sugar control diets. You control your sugar intake, specifically your blood sugar intake, you will lose weight, you will feel better, you will heal better. So all those things come into play. So what we're going to do tonight is talk about how sugar affects us and what foods we can eat to reduce our blood sugar, and specifically what times to eat and where we can improve. Now, the one thing with nutrition is that it's a gigantic field. And everybody, as a nutritionalist, I disagree with a lot of other nutritionalists. And that's okay. We can all have our own opinion. But when you listen to a talk on nutrition, you have to try and take little pieces and implement them in your life. Don't try and radically change your life. Don't try and radically change your diet. Because what do you think happens when you do that? You fail, nothing sticks, you feel frustrated, you don't get what you want to get. But if you take little pieces and you say, I'm going to do that, I'm going to make that a change, then you can build on that over time. And it's really based on something called the Rule of Adaptation. It's actually a chiropractic law, but it really transcends to everything. And the Rule of Adaptation states that we as humans, the power that's within us, allows us to adapt to whatever comes our way. So if we live in Alaska, we adapt to the cold weather. If we live on the equator, we adapt to the hot weather. If we are Eskimos and we eat tons of whale blubber, we adapt to tons of whale blubber. If you are living in a metropolis and you're eating lots of fast food, guess what your body adapts to? So you can't radically change that because your body hasn't adapted to it. For example, if we all moved to the northern Canada and we started eating whale blubber, do you think we'd all do great? No. So, but the Eskimos there are doing very well. In fact, they have very low heart disease and almost no cancer. Does that mean that whale blubber is good for all of us? No. But if we adapted over time, and a lot of times it's not just over time, it's over generations, then we would be able to eat that, and our actual metabolism is designed to adapt. So can you change? Absolutely. But what I always tell people with diet, because I've helped a lot of people lose weight, I've helped a lot of people change their diet, but where do you think that starts? Where do you think the first thing I do is to help people change? Where does it start? What part of your body? Your mind, yeah. So all change starts here first. You got to decide why you want to do it, what's your goals, how you're going to do it, and part of that is coming to this workshop so that you can see where it really affects you. Because you change your mind and all of a sudden it's really easy to avoid certain foods. For example, one of the big things that we see is addiction to fast food, addiction to the salts and the sugars and the fats that they put in those fast foods. So it's a combination that's very, very addictive. And so when you just say, well, fast food's bad, so I'm not going to do it, how well do you think that works? It doesn't work very well at all. As soon as you smell it, you're like, ooh, fast food not so bad. But if you start to learn about what fast food does to your body, you actually learn about the addiction process. You learn that there's a science behind fast food that makes you addicted, and you start to understand the process there, then it's much easier to say no to fast food. And after a while, and does anyone know how long it takes to make something stick in your body, or make a rut in your body? Or anyone know how long that takes?
31 days. 31.
30, yeah. So it takes 30 days to create a new pattern. You got to do something for 30 days to create a new pattern. That's the minimum. And so if you do it for 20 days, you haven't really created a new pattern. But if you do it for 30 days, now you're starting to create the new pattern. And just like if you quit smoking, smoking's a good example. There's not so many people smoke now, but when you quit smoking, you know, the first 30 days are really tough, and then as you get longer and longer into that process, you become less and less, you know, addicted to the smoking. Doesn't mean you ever are not addicted, but it becomes easier and easier. Same is true of changing your diet. That makes sense? So sugar is something that we need. Can anyone tell me what type of sugar we actually use in our body? What's it called? Glucose, yeah. Awesome. Glucose is what we use. Do we use fructose and galactose and high fructose and corn syrup? All those things have to be converted to what? Glucose. Glucose is the only thing we use. Glucose, glucose, glucose. Everything else is converted to glucose. So when we talk about sugar, sugar encompasses a lot of things. It's the whole carbohydrate realm, right? But if you break it all down, we're really talking about glucose. And when I'm talking about specifically blood glucose levels, so that's important because when it's circulating through our blood, then it can be used by any cell. They just pull it right into the cell, they turn it into energy. Anyone know what the energy is actually called? Go back to your high school days. ATP, right? Anyone remember that term, ATP? But it's turned into energy, and then we can use it. So, for example, when you get low blood sugar, the reason that it affects our brain so bad is that our brain requires a lot of energy, and when the blood sugar goes down, that means the fuel for our brain is waning, and our brain can't function. So the actual major computer starts to shut down. We start to have failure there. That's why you feel so faint. That's why if you get really low, they pull the plug and you pass out, because you can't function without that sugar. So there's a lot of ways we control blood sugar in our body. One is by fat. So we have fat stores that can be converted to glucose and then can help our blood sugar. Another is called glycogen. Glycogen is glucose that's been stored in your cells. So picture, instead of the glucose being readily available, we put it in a box and we put it on the shelf. But if we ever need glucose, we can pull that box off and open it up very quickly. So glycogen within the cells is a very quick way to get sugar and get specifically energy for our body. Here's the problem. Glucose, although it's essential for our body, it's also very damaging to other cells. So who's heard of the term oxidant? You've probably heard of antioxidant. Well, glucose is a very powerful oxidant, which means it'll age you, it'll damage other tissues, it'll damage other proteins, it'll damage the sides of your walls of your artery, it'll damage cells, all those kind of things, especially if it's in high concentrations. So that's where diabetes comes in. So there's 3 types of diabetes. I think it's on there on your sheet. Sorry, I never go by this, but I'll try and stick to this a little bit. But there's 3 types of diabetes. Type 1 is called insulin dependent. That's usually found in younger people. It can come on suddenly, but that's where your body doesn't produce enough insulin. So how do they treat that? They give you insulin. In fact, and many of you know that I'm not a huge fan of modern medicine, giving drugs for every ailment and all that stuff. But that's one of the conditions that absolutely works well. In fact, I always say that when you have a physical problem, the best solution is a physical solution. You sprain an ankle, the best solution is to work on that ankle, you know, work it out, massage, get it adjusted, ice it, all physical things. If you have a chemical problem, the best solution is a chemical solution. If you have a mental problem, the best solution is a mental solution. But the reality is, in the world of medicine, we treat almost everything with what? Chemicals. So if it's a physical problem, we treat it chemically. Oh, here's your anti-inflammatories, here's your muscle relaxers, here's your pain pills, here's your anti-anxiety medications, here's your antidepressants. If you have a chemical problem, they treat it chemically. If you have a mental problem, how do they treat it? Chemically. Oh, here's your chemicals. But chemicals don't solve mental problems, and chemicals don't solve physical problems. So, and chemicals rarely or solve chemical problems. But in type 1 diabetes, it absolutely does solve that problem.
Type 2
Question?
also.
Type 2 somewhat. Type 2 is what we call non-insulin dependent. So in type 2, you have insulin, but your cells don't recognize it. So in other words, you've burnt out the receptors for insulin, and now the insulin's not doing its job. I'm going to explain how insulin works here in a second. So in type 2, that's more of an issue that you can control by reducing your dependence on insulin, and that's where a low glycemic or a blood sugar diet, controlling diet, will make a world of difference with type 2. Type 3 is with pregnancy, so that's a whole different thing. But let's focus on the most common type now, which is type 2. Type 2 is also called adult onset. It's where we're burning out those receptors. But let's talk about how blood sugar works here for a second. So when we eat a meal, that food has to be digested, and then the enzymes and the digestive acids break it down into glucose and amino acids and fats, fatty acids, and so forth. But that glucose then is absorbed in your digestive tract, and it starts to raise your blood sugar levels. And so when we talk about glycemic index, that's really just an index of how fast your blood sugar rises after you eat something. So if I eat, and I'm sorry I'd have to draw over this stuff, but if I eat some meal, it takes a little while for it to digest, and then it starts to raise my blood sugar up into a place where I hit maximum, and then my body's going to start either moving it into fat or moving it into the cells or getting it out of the blood sugar, and I'm going to come back down, and I'm going to go below normal. There's normal. I'm going to go below normal, but then I'm going to come back to normal, and that's how my blood sugar would raise. Insulin is that hormone that your body produces to control blood sugar. So insulin opens up the cells, it opens up the tissues, it allows fat metabolism, it does all sorts of things. But when the blood sugar rises, the insulin also rises. And it's almost an identical chart that looks like that. And so insulin and blood sugar will, so let me put this insulin, and this is blood sugar. Insulin and blood sugar almost identically rise and fall depending on your body. The problem with type 2 diabetes is even though you have an insulin rise, your blood sugar doesn't go down, it stays up. And it takes a lot longer to go down because the receptors for the insulin are burnt out. So what happens if I eat a highly sugar-filled, processed sugar meal? So I eat high fructose corn syrup, lots of candy, lots of, Thanksgiving, and Halloween's coming up, so I'm going to gorge myself on all that candy. What happens with that? Well, first of all, if I'm eating just glucose, there's almost no time to digest. It just goes straight through, and then it's absorbed quickly. So I get a very rapid rise. I'm going to draw it up here. I get a very rapid rise, and it goes way up there, and it peaks out, and then it comes down, and what happens? I get a crash. So it goes way lower than normal, and then I finally come back up. That's what happens if I eat a high sugared meal, or what we call a high glycemic index. The high glycemic foods that you see in some of your charts, that's what they do to our body. What happens to the insulin? Same thing. Insulin rises in accordance to that, gets up there, goes down, and it follows almost an identical trail, but this is insulin, that's blood sugar. So with high glycemic foods, we have a ton of blood sugar, and remember, when blood sugar goes up, it damages all the cells and the tissues, and it creates inflammation, and it causes acidity in our body. So that's not good. But it also causes a huge rise in insulin. And when we have a huge rise in insulin, we bombard those receptors. Bombard those receptors. They are working hard. And over a lifetime of eating a ton of sugary foods, what do you think happens to those receptors? They burn out. They get used up. They no longer work the way they're supposed to work. And that's where type 2 diabetes really stems from, is a lifetime of bad eating of highly sugar-filled foods. So what's the worst glycemic index foods you can eat? What do you think? Candy.
White flour.
White flour has a high glycemic index, but that's not like the worst. So would you hit it on the head? Candy. What else? Soda, which is basically candy. Candy in a can. Cookies, yeah. High fructose corn syrup. Fructose, and on one of my charts here, it says fructose. So on the bottom of this low GI meals, it says fructose is actually a low GI. Because fructose takes time to digest. Yep, you should have that one. It's the, yep. So fructose technically takes longer to digest. When something takes longer to digest, or when it's a low glycemic index food, can you get me another color? It takes longer for it to digest. Let's say that we're eating some vegetables that take a while to digest, but they have sugar in them. So we have to break it all apart. That's taking time. That's taking more time. Then we finally release the sugar. Then the sugar is released, and we get a slow but steady rise in blood sugar. That's low glycemic index. So low glycemic index is valuable because we don't get the spikes, right? So eating low glycemic foods helps to keep your blood sugar far more level. You don't get the spikes that you do with other stuff. However, the high fructose corn syrup has to be processed into what? Glucose. So it takes longer for it to digest, to get into your system, but then it has to make its way to your liver, and your liver has to split it apart into glucose. Now that process, especially with high fructose corn syrup, creates a lot more glucose. So it took a while for it to digest, but then all of a sudden, boom, you're exploding that blood glucose, which is noticed by the body, which causes a big rise in insulin, which is why that high fructose corn syrup creates some of the highest spikes of glucose. So when you hear on those commercials, well, it turns out your body doesn't know the difference. It certainly does know the difference. In fact, they've done studies where they've taken rats and they've fed them pure glucose. And they've taken other rats and fed them the exact same caloric diet of high fructose corn syrup. And guess what happens to the high fructose corn syrup rats? They get diabetes, they develop heart disease, they become obese, and they die much earlier than these guys. Turns out these guys actually live a fairly normal life for rats. So the process there is that it is a huge difference. And that's why we say you got to avoid as much as possible the high fructose corn syrup. It is absolutely one of the worst foods you can have. And you can see on there the candy and the pop, sports drinks, corn syrup, all that stuff is, and that's what the HFCS is, high fructose corn syrup. All of the stuff, man-made processed foods, is containing that stuff. Is sugared with those kind of things, which makes them very bad. Fruit drinks is a good example. So if you have a fruit drink, you have to look at the very first ingredient. And if the first ingredient is one of two things, throw it away. What's those two things? Sugar and? Well, that's same. Or water. If water and sugar are the first two ingredients, then you need to get rid of that, because it's basically sugar water. If you see fruit as the first ingredient, then it still has a high glycemic index, but at least it's based on real fruit. So the sugar you're getting is from the fruit. Fruit has a higher glycemic index than most vegetables, but it still is good for you. And that's natural sugars that your body knows how to digest. That makes sense? So what we really want to do when we look at our charts here is we want to keep a low. So what happens with a low glycemic index is it takes a longer time for it to digest, and the blood sugar rises gradually, and then it hits its peak, and then it comes back down. And so two things are good. One is we don't have a huge rise in our insulin, so a much lower level of insulin, which doesn't burn out our receptors. And secondly, we don't have that lull on the bottom. So when we come up and we come down slowly, it really just bottoms out to level. And so this is increased energy without the flip side when we eat low glycemic index foods. Just about every diet that I've ever looked at, from the South Beach diet to the Zone diet to all those kind of things, are based on low glycemic index foods. So I gave you a list of all the things you can eat, and we're going to talk a little bit about when to eat them and when not to eat them and that sort of stuff. But if you want to keep your blood sugar relatively low and constant, not up and down, you eat low glycemic food indexes. Now here's another thing. What if I eat a huge meal? What do you think happens to your blood sugar? It goes much higher than if I eat a small meal. So portion control is very important. But what if I eat the same amount of calories, I just eat them at many times during the day? What happens to the blood sugar? Stays much more stable than eating a huge meal, huge rise, huge lull, finally back, another huge meal, huge rise, huge low, another stabilization, huge rise. It's like a roller coaster ride, which burns out the insulin receptors, which causes lots of lulls, which causes lots of damage, oxidative stress to your system. So this is the component. So when you're eating that candy, don't just think, man, this tastes good. Think, man, I'm actually burning out my system right now. Does that mean that you can't have candy once in a while? Yes, it does. It means you can't. No, I'm kidding. Lord knows I don't have the best diet, but one of the things that I try and do, and especially with our kids, because you can't control, kids love the taste of it all and stuff, is you try and control it as much as you can, and you can't do better than that. So inflammation is caused when we damage the cells and cause an acidic environment in our body. And that's when we have higher blood sugar. What do you think happens when we keep this blood sugar rise relatively low? Do you think the body becomes less acidic or more acidic? A lot less acidic. So we're creating a lot less inflammation in the body. What condition do you think would help with less inflammation in our body?
Arthritis.
Arthritis, absolutely. Heart disease, yeah, absolutely. In fact, there's pretty much nothing that won't improve. One of the things that we do with fibromyalgia patients, and fibromyalgia is kind of a mystery disease that basically, if you boil it down, fibro is fiber, myo is muscle, algia is pain. Pain of fiber and muscle. You've got random pain throughout the body. Almost all fibromyalgia is an acidity problem in your body, whether it's caused by blood sugar or another reason. But if your body is acidic and you start changing the way you eat, and you reduce that acidity, instant fix for fibromyalgia. Now that may not cure every symptom, but that certainly will help. So even just doing that kind of difference in diet will make a huge difference. So when we look at metabolism, the same is true. So this person, you'd think, has a spike of energy and then a lull of energy, but it only works up to a certain level. And Harvard did a study on metabolism and found that when your blood sugar exceeds a certain level, and that's going to be different for different people. It might be 250 or it might be 300. But when you exceed that level, your energy actually goes down because now your immune system has to fight the increased acidity. There's nothing more metabolically taxing or use more energy up than your immune system. So that's why when you're sick, you feel super tired, you're just drained, you can't lift your arms. That's because your immune system is working hard. And so when your blood sugar raises too high, now your immune system has to kick in to try and stave off all the damage that's going on. It uses more energy. You didn't get more energy from that. And of course, when it goes down, now your body has to mobilize all the glycogen out of those cells and try and get that blood sugar up so that you don't starve your brain. And so that takes more energy. So really, this rise and fall costs you a lot more energy than it ever gains. And that's why when you eat candy, lots of candy, do you feel just energetic for the whole day and you just feel great and you just can't wait to go work out? And no, it actually sucks the energy from you. And so this kind of thing, when you eat, you know, a good healthy snack, maybe vegetables or nuts or you know, pieces of fruit or something like that in small doses, and you nibble on them throughout the day, you keep your blood sugar very level. You don't invoke your immune system. You don't invoke all the other components, and you actually increase the energy. And so that's where, if you eat that way and if you keep your blood sugar very constant, your energy will feel much, much higher. And that's kind of the way we were designed to be. You know, we weren't designed to eat huge, vast amounts of glucose. In fact, if you look around, God didn't create any just pure candy, glucose type things, you know? We created it. Man created it, right? We boiled it all down in our chemistry labs and created it in devious ways so that it tastes even better than it should. So when the process of keeping your blood sugar level not only will have a health benefit that you're not creating an acidic environment in your body, but it'll actually have a metabolism benefit in that you are more energy-wise and you are actually burning more calories than you would normally because things are at a much lower level in terms of immune system. So does it all make sense? I don't know if I explained that real well. So when we talk, because I mentioned, you know, foods that God made, we often talk in the maximized living world about God-made foods versus man-made food. So God-made food means that these are created in the earth. They're as natural as possible. They were grown. They are like, even if we talk about animals, they're cows that graze on grass, that have natural environments, that are not raised in pens or that kind of stuff, as opposed to man-made foods, which are often created in a laboratory, that are processed much differently, that don't even really resemble the original thing. You know, like when you see apple flavored something or other, that apple flavoring may not have even come from an apple. It's just chemical messengers that make your brain think that this was sort of like an apple. That makes sense? One of the scary things about the world of health, or the world of food, is that because there's proprietary things, licenses, the companies never have to reveal the flavoring that goes on in their processed foods. So because they said if we reveal the flavoring, then everyone will copy it. So a lot of times we don't even know what this stuff does to our body. We don't even know what's in it. A lot of those things are what's called excitotoxins. Excitotoxins are like MSG that stimulate our brain. They're specific to stimulate our brain and make us happy or make us feel a certain way and that sort of thing, so that the food makes us happier. Make sense? What do you think that does to your body? You think that's good or bad? Bad. If it was good, I'm sure God would have put it in the foods. So one of the things that's super easy, that's just absolutely, you know, you can't miss, is eat more God-made foods in the most natural form possible. Eat less man-made processed foods in the worst, you know, source possible. And if you do that, you're going to get phenomenal results. Guess what the vast majority, not all, but guess what the vast majority of God-made foods are? Low or high on the glycemic index? Very low. Yeah, so it takes a while to digest, and as it does, it slowly but surely raises our blood sugar, just like that chart there. By the way, when we eat God-made foods, there's an added benefit in that our bodies, remember I said our bodies adapt? Well, it turns out that all the digestive acids in our stomach, all the enzymes in our small intestine and so forth, all have a function. And so when I pick up an orange, for example, innately, I didn't have to learn this, it was already built into my system, my brain understands that's an orange. You know, you might even feel your glands, your salivary glands starting to go. And it's already prepping the digestive tract to digest this orange. It already has the enzymes, the right amount of acids. Every component is already preparing for that orange to go down. And so when I eat that orange, every component gets a workout. Every component gets used. And when every component gets used, it's similar to that old adage, use it or lose it. So when every component gets used, that means my digestive tract stays healthier. And that means that every component is functioning normally. What happens if I take a little vitamin pill that is supposedly got all the nutrients of an orange? First of all, does my brain recognize it? No. So it's a bit of a shock when I eat it, and all of a sudden it goes through and it says, whoa, there's vitamin C here, and there's other stuff. And so the enzymes have to sort of rally and do that. But secondly, because it's so small, a lot of times, a lot of the systems never get used. So if you don't use it, what happens? You lose it. So if I eat this all the time, my body's actually going to stop producing those enzymes because it adapts to what I'm eating, correct? So that's where a lot of people ask me, well, what's the best vitamin pill I should be on? I want a multivitamin, all this kind of stuff. And it's like, I'm not a big fan of taking lots of vitamins. I mean, there's certain things you have to take, like vitamin D, for example, omega oils. Those are very good for you. But to take a lot of vitamins, you're actually bombarding your system with unnatural things. And so I'd much rather eat God-made foods because that's better on many, many levels. Make sense? So, sure.
How can you explain how does that work? Like, how does your body, that trigger that happens, that sort of sends that message? Do you understand how that works?
Well, that's a complex thing, but let's put it this way. No scientific experiment has ever proven how the brain can work or the nervous system can work. So I always explain it like this. If someone was in another room and they're tapping on the wall, so we can hear it. And we say, someone's definitely tapping. That's kind of like the scientific, the scientists can see that electrical messages are passing through those nerves and they're going to the brain. We can see it. We can measure it. But what does it mean? Well, we don't know. It's tapping. We can see electrical messages. How does the brain perceive it? If you knew Morse code, you could say, oh, someone's communicating with me. It's SOS or whatever it is. But we don't know Morse code. We don't know the code for the brain. So we don't know how the brain perceives it. Clearly, the messages go from the eye to the brain. The brain perceives it as an orange. Then it sends electrical messages out to all the components and tells them, prepare for an orange. It's going to be coming down the chute. So get everything ready, and that's how it works. But how does it work? I don't know.
When you say all the components, do you mean all the digestive components, or are you talking about, okay.
All the digestive components, yep. So that's how it all runs. Now, I mean, it's phenomenal amount of intelligence there. And it never ceases to amaze me how everything just fits like perfectly together, how it all runs so smoothly, and how it can all unravel so quickly when we mess it up with, more man-made things. So as soon as we start putting in, for example, you have heartburn. So you start taking in antacid. That kills off the stomach acid. What do you think your brain does? Stomach acid's low. We got to increase stomach acid. So more stomach acid, more heartburn, more antacids. Well, that's not working. Let's take Prilosec. Prilosec goes and blocks the acid-forming cells. Brain says, still no acid. Better create more cells. So you go through this thing. Are you actually helping yourself? Yeah, you have less heartburn. But have you made yourself healthier? Have you helped yourself digest food? No, you've actually made things worse. You got in the way of the whole program. So one of the things that we do definitively differently than, say, medical doctors is we try and get out of the way and let God's healing do its work and let the whole program work the way it was designed to work, because the more you get into the way of it, the more adaptations are made to make up for the low stomach acid and so forth. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So avoid high fructose corn syrup. That goes without saying. Syndrome X. Who's heard of Syndrome X? So Syndrome X is it's kind of a newer thing. It's been, I'd say, the last 10 years. But that is what's really happening to Americans more than any other country. That means that we're getting overweight. We're increasingly more diabetic, specifically type 2 diabetic. We are developing heart disease. Specifically, we're getting a lot of plaquing and stuff. We're increasing our blood pressure, and we're becoming more acidic. That's Syndrome X in a bubble. So, Americans more than anywhere are developing that kind of stuff. And we found that, a lot of the chemicals that they're putting in food are leading more to Syndrome X. One of the great, I think it's the great new lines of study is on brain chemistry. And specifically, it's on the chemicals that they put in food that make us want that food. So we've always known that when you take a carbohydrate and you combine a salt and you put in a fat, that combination, in the right combination, is deadly. Bet you can't bite just one. Oh, I can. I got to keep eating until I'm gorged, And then as soon as you think you're full, 10 minutes later, you want more. And because it's really a brain chemistry issue. And so we know that we're susceptible to that. But then you start putting in chemicals that go to the brain in different ways, and you can create all sorts of addictions. But you realize that God didn't put those chemicals in the foods there. And there's very rare occasions where, if at all, that you see carbohydrates, fats, and salts all in the same degree in natural foods or God-made foods. They're only in processed foods. So if you avoid processed foods as much as you can, you're not going to fall into that rut. Does that make sense? So Syndrome X is an absolutely avoidable situation. But this is where it starts, is low glycemic index foods. Avoid alcohol, avoid smoking. These two things have had a very negative effect on blood sugar. They kind of go, that's kind of should be fairly obvious to people. I always say right now, if you're a teenager and you decide to take up smoking, it's not like it wasn't known that smoking is bad. So, and it's not like it's not known that smoking is very expensive. And it's not known, that smoking causes a multitude of problems, including lung cancer. So if you're a teenager and you start smoking, you know what you're getting into. Whereas, 50 years ago, people thought, they saw Elvis on the screen, they said, well, that's cool. He's smoking. I get it. It's safe. The tobacco industry tells us it's safe. So it's got to be safe. The government said it was safe, Good, keep listening to the government. So obviously those things are true. Now, alcohol in moderation is absolutely fine. Caffeine in moderation is absolutely fine. You're not going to have huge rises or falls if you do it in moderation. Artificial sweeteners. Now, this is a specific thing that I've done a class specifically on artificial sweeteners. And I've read, in fact, in prepping for this talk, I went through a lot of the different programs out there, and the blood sugar, the Diabetes Foundation, for example, and Kaiser puts out a class, and I've read through their synopsis and stuff. And guess what keeps coming up? Don't eat sugar, eat artificial sweeteners. There's nothing worse than your body. I'd much rather you eat sugar than artificial sweeteners. Here's what artificial sweeteners do. So they don't rise the blood sugar because they're not sugar, but they do trick your insulin in going up. So your insulin goes, so here's your blood sugar. Your blood sugar didn't go up, but your insulin went up because it was tricked into going up, and because of that, your blood sugar dips way low. Do you think that's good for you? No. It's horrible for you. Aside from the fact that the actual artificial sweeteners cause acidity in your body. So you're creating damage, which creates inflammation, which creates an immune response, plus you're getting lower blood sugar because the insulin response is high, and you're burning out your insulin receptors. So NutraSweet, all that stuff. And here's the crummy thing. This is all very known in the world of healthcare. It's been known for years that NutraSweet, saccharin creates cancer in rats every time they do that study. So all those kind of stuff, sucralose is another one. They injure you in various ways. They've known for a long, long time that it's dangerous, that they shouldn't be doing it, and yet this is a billion-dollar industry. So we're not going to see these sugar-free stuff get off the market anytime soon. There is alternatives. So I'd much rather you eat a low glycemic food. You know, have sugar if you want sugar. It's not going to kill you. Whereas this stuff, the artificial sweeteners, will kill you. So the other thing is there's stevia. And for those of you who have seen the documentary on stevia and all that stuff, I mean, stevia is a natural herb from South America. It has no known side effects. It doesn't taste great. But guess what you do when you take stevia over a long time? You adapt to it. Just like asparagus didn't taste good to us when we were small, but you know, you develop the taste and then you grow to love asparagus, or not. But you can grow to, you know, accept it. But stevia doesn't do the insulin rise. So stevia has a sweet flavor without any blood sugar rise, so you can keep that level. So a lot of these artificial sweeteners, just stay away from them. They're not good for you. Don't listen to the diabetes, you know, who makes a major money donation to the Diabetes Foundation. Drug companies that make artificial sweeteners. Yeah, I'm not kidding. I mean, and with Kaiser, yeah, question?
How about Truvia?
Truvia is good. Yeah, it's a stevia type of thing. So yeah, same derivative of stevia. Yep. So, and they're coming out now with different types of things that make it easier. Stevia has never been okayed by the federal government to be called a sweetener. So technically it's called a supplement. So you can take a dietary supplement, but it's coming out in little packages, so you can put it in your coffee or you can do that kind of stuff, and it'll become much easier. But they're fighting it tooth and nail. By the way, you know why they didn't release it as a sweetener? Because they had the government had an anonymous source that said that it causes side effects. No scientific studies, no people dying, no side effects, no people going to the hospital. They had an anonymous person question it. And I'm guessing that anonymous person happens to work for a big pharmaceutical company, which also creates, I mean, this is how business is done. So, so that will eventually be easier and easier, but that would be a good resource. Yeah, it's coming out now. Truvia is another one, yeah. So honey, maple syrup, agave syrup, brown rice syrup, sugar in the raw. Let's talk about sugar in the raw, for example, because when we take a sugar molecule that has been stripped of all the components, so we take the sugar cane, we extract the sugar in the raw, and then we boil it down further and we bleach it so that it's white, and we then release it as table sugar. When we eat table sugar, we have a strong rise in blood sugar, strong rise in insulin. But when we eat sugar in the raw, it takes longer for your body to break it down, because it's got the components. That's why it's brown. It was brown in its natural state. So it takes longer for the blood sugar to rise. It'll still rise pretty high, but it's much better than, say, table sugar. Now, you mentioned white flour. Same is true of white flour. White flour was, they took the flour and they bleached it. They removed all the essential, components of it, and they just had the flour. And then, anyone know what enriched flour is?
Vitamins back into it.
Right. So they take chemically made vitamins, and like that vitamin pill, and they put it back into the raw form of the flour. So when your body takes this stuff in, it doesn't really know what to do. I mean, all the enzymes, all the components are looking at this stuff, going, it seems familiar to us, but we're not really sure what it is. So that's where eating natural stuff. So I always say eat. If you're going to eat bread, eat whole wheat bread and so forth. Whole wheat bread, believe it or not, is not that much less in glycemic index, because it'll cause a rise, but it does give your digestive tract a lot more of a workout than, say, bleached, enriched, flour, like the Wonder Bread. Wonder Bread truly is a wonder, because it lasts forever. I mean, when you took it out, you can take that thing out and put it on the counter. 3 weeks later, it's soft and it's perfect. You slice it, it's like no mold. I mean, not even mold will touch that stuff. So obviously, we shouldn't touch that stuff. So exercise regularly. This is a huge, huge component. Now, remember when I said you have different levels of getting your blood sugar balanced. So whenever your blood sugar drops or goes up, we have insulin that keeps it down. We have glycogen and fat stores that we can dump into the bloodstream to get that blood sugar back up. Well, glycogen is the storage of sugar inside our cells. That's cellular storage. The more you exercise, the more cellular stores you have. So even when we see slight drops or rises, we can just take it straight from the cells very quickly and keep that up. So here's how it works. When we're running a race, the first about 10 seconds, our muscles start using the blood sugar that's there. We need energy, so we're using all the blood sugar, and the blood sugar starts to go down. And then the next step after the first 10 seconds is we say our blood sugar is dropping, we need to get more blood sugar, we need more energy, so we take all the glycogen out of the cells and we start putting it in. That can last, in a trained athlete, that can last up to a minute. But it's not going to go much more than a minute. In an untrained athlete, it might only last a few seconds. So the glycogen then, the stores get used up, and now we have to go back to the fat stores. And the fat stores take longer to come up, but now we can start using the fat stores. In a trained athlete, the pathway to the fat stores is very defined and very easy to use. In an untrained athlete or an untrained person, that's a tough pathway. It takes longer, and that's where you have to slow down and your blood sugar starts to drop and you can't control your blood sugar as well. So exercise increases your cellular stores of blood sugar, which helps keep your balance, and it also allows a better pathway to the fat cells. So you're using that. But you've got to use those systems. So when you exercise, you can't just exercise for 30 seconds because you're really not using the fat storage system. So anyone know what time it is, how long you have to exercise in order to maximize that fat pathway?
30 minutes?
No, it's a little long. Close. 12. 12 in most people. So 12 minutes is, and remember I talked about 12-minute exercise, 12-minute exercise. It doesn't mean you have to be running for a full 12 minutes, but you have to be exercising for a minimum of 12 minutes to start that fat pathway. The more fit you become, the longer you have to exercise. The less fit you are, the less you have to exercise, but you have to exercise those pathways if you want to use that. Now, they've shown over and over in studies, Harvard did a great study that showed the more you exercise, the more you control your blood sugar because you have these storage facilities that allow you to either, to either up it or lower it depending on that. The other thing is that insulin receptors become more receptive when you what? Exercise. So not sure how that all works, but when you exercise, you need that blood sugar to be used by the muscles, which allows those receptors to become more keen or more attractive to the insulin. So the insulin can plug it in, and then you can pull the blood sugar out of the blood and into your muscles and use it for energy. Does that make sense? So exercise, you have to, if you want to do any program, you have to incorporate both eating and exercise. And now there's a lot of different ways to do that, and we can talk about that later, and we do the workshop all on just exercise, but you have to exercise. There's no two ways around it. So, and I laugh at all these like Weight Watcher ads, and they say, I didn't do any exercise, I just ate differently and I lost the weight. And they might have been successful at that, but they haven't made themselves healthier. You understand that you can starve yourself and lose weight. People in concentration camps lost lots of weight. They weren't healthy.
They had this article in our monthly magazine that we get at Lincoln Hills, and it was from the lady in charge of the fitness, and she said, you might see these people that are skinny, but what they are skinny fat.
Yeah, yeah.
And then people who have a little more weight are more, and are exercising, are in better shape.
Yeah, absolutely. So there's, and I've often said that there's, like for example, the world of cholesterol right now, they want you to lower your cholesterol, everything's lower your cholesterol. Now that was all put forth by the drug companies that make cholesterol lowering medications. But there's a world of people now dying of heart disease of strokes or heart attacks who have great cholesterol. We haven't reduced the heart attacks or strokes at all, but we've lowered their cholesterol. So the question is not that you Are you any healthier? That's what I always ask. That's where the scientific studies really fall short, in my opinion. And I read a lot of scientific studies. I'm into that. I'm a scientific nerd, if you want to call me that. Not you, though. But because I'm her boss. That's how I think. But when I read those studies, a lot of them ask the wrong questions. So they ask questions like, did that reduce their cholesterol? Yes. So it must be successful. But they didn't ask the question, did that make them a healthier person? Are they able to adapt to their environment better? Are they in a healthier environment? Are they in a healthier place? And the correct answer is no. They're actually more sick than they ever were, but they have a better cholesterol level. So the question is not whether this is going to help you, in certain ways. The question that you should always ask is this going to make me a healthier me? Am I going to be a healthier person as a result? How am I doing for time? So let's talk about herbs and natural foods that help with diabetes and blood sugar. Now, there's a lot of stuff on the internet, and as a nutritionalist, I've seen so much stuff, and I get hit up by a lot of different people saying this is the way to go. There's 4 things that I have found personally that help with blood sugar. Cinnamon is the first one. So cinnamon can be sprinkled on your food, sprinkle it on an apple, take it on a regular basis. It definitely lowers blood sugar. So if you have a high blood sugar problem, if you're one of those people that has type 2 diabetes or even type 1 diabetes, taking cinnamon on a regular basis is going to definitely help.
What about the cinnamon capsules?
I'm not a big fan of the cinnamon capsules, but they do definitely help as well. Yep. Ginseng is another one.
Are there different kinds of cinnamon? I remember reading somewhere where there's different.
There's a whole bunch of different types and different, where it's taken from and all that kind of stuff, where it's grown. And all the studies are sort of very vague on what exact type it is. So rather than try and find a certain type, just know that cinnamon definitely helps. Ginseng is another one. So there's lots of different types of ginseng as well, but in the studies that I've read, ginseng definitely helps to balance blood sugar. So ginseng doesn't necessarily lower it, but taken regularly, and that can be definitely taken in a capsule, ginseng definitely helps to balance your blood sugar. Quality protein. So this one is one of the reasons that we have, a very good quality protein source up there, is that when you take proteins like the molecule that you can use in every way, you can build muscle, you can turn it into fat, you can turn it into sugar, you can do lots of different things with protein. And turns out that protein will cause a very slow rise in blood sugar and will oftentimes be used to balance blood sugar. So a lot of times when I see people with very definitive sugar problems, they also are very deficient in protein, specifically quality protein. So this is an easy one to fix, really. You can increase your quality protein. There's lots of good sources on here of quality proteins that you can buy. Specifically, though, the white meats. So don't go for red meat. Red meat actually is not a very good glycemic index type of protein. Even if it's grass-fed cows and that kind of stuff, stick with chicken or fish. That kind of stuff is better glycemically. Salmon's not as good. So salmon is a little more fatty, and so wild salmon is better. Certainly not any of the farm stuff. So a protein supplement is a very easy thing, but protein supplements come in a wide variety of quality. So you can get really crummy protein sources, protein supplements from GNC or wherever it is. They don't dissolve in any fluid that I can see, so you have to just take it down like chalk, I guess. And the second thing is they're taken from very low quality protein sources, which is why they're cheap. But if you take a high quality protein source that's taken from, say, grass-fed cows that aren't fed hormones, that aren't in a pen their whole life, that aren't really acidic and, like for example, we talked about Syndrome X. That's exactly what they do to cows. So they feed cows sugar, which causes these high, fluctuations. Those cows get fat, they develop diabetes, they have massive heart disease, they're fatty all over, which makes them very attractive in terms of when you cut them up, because you get the ripples of fat through the meat, but you also get a lot more poundage. from those. So those kind of cows fed sugar weigh and are much bigger in girth than natural cows. But when you eat those things, you also get the crummy materials that they ate. So those kind of things put into a protein source is not particularly good for your body. So taking natural sources like, we have the Dream protein. You can find them in lots of places, but they cost a little more, but they are much, much better for you. And so a protein source, and usually what I do is I take a protein drink every morning. You just mix it up and drink it. It tastes good. It's not, and we flavor it with stevia, so you're not getting a whole lot of sugar with it. But that way you're balancing your blood sugar a lot better. For me, I don't eat a lot of breakfast stuff. It just doesn't fit well with my body. I've never adapted to it. So a protein shake is an easy solution.
Excuse me. Do you put like blueberries?
You can. Yep.
That's what
Yep, you can. So so that's protein. Vinegar is another one. So vinegar and to some degree apple cider vinegar is another one. But you take 1 to 2 teaspoons of that, helps to really balance the blood sugar. And that's something that I've found, it actually helps a lot of things. I use it more for digestive issues, but it helps to repopulate the digestive tract by killing off a lot of the fungus and a lot of the yeast that grows in the digestive tract. You kill that stuff off, you make it a much better environment for the bacteria, and more good bacteria in your gut helps the digestive process there. Question?
Apple cider vinegar, does it have to have a mother, or can it just be the apple cider?
It can just be the apple cider, yeah.
What is the best time of day to take that?
It doesn't really matter. So yeah, for all these supplements, if you're taking them as supplements, I generally recommend not taking with food because it is acidic going down. It's actually acidic going down, but alkaline in your body, which is a paradox there. But you can take it with food. So I mean, and I do if I was going to take it, but it really doesn't matter what time you do it. I mean, we'll talk a little bit about time frame. So I wouldn't take it with a lot of sugar, because obviously it's there to balance sugar. But other than that, it can be taken anytime. Chromium is the other one. And chromium is not necessarily, remember I said there was 4 things that I recommend. Chromium's the 5th. Chromium is when people are deficient in chromium, and a lot of diabetics are deficient in chromium. And so chromium has a big component in your metabolism and how you metabolize sugar. So if your chromium is low, then you're not metabolizing sugar very well, which means your blood sugar definitely goes up.
How do you get chromium?
Take it as a supplement. So any health food store. Yep. So eat the right foods at the right time. So now this is a generalization. So everyone is a little different in how they metabolize food and how they've adapted. But the easy thing to do here is that you eat the majority of your carbohydrates or your carbohydrate-rich foods in the morning up to the mid-afternoon. And then in the evening, you just eat vegetables and protein. So for example, a typical dinner for my wife and I is a vegetable and a protein. It's not the old British system where you always have a potato. And they used to say potato, vegetable, meat, and there would always be a carbohydrate. Now the new thinking is eliminate the carbohydrate, especially from evening on, and especially 2 to 3 hours before you go to bed. When you take a lot of carbohydrates right before you go to sleep, what do you think happens to those carbohydrates? They get digested and they get turned into fat. So your body builds at night, it breaks down during the day. So you give it the energy foods in the morning before you are, when you need the energy, and then at night you give it the building blocks, which is the proteins, the amino acids are your main building blocks, and the fibers from the vegetables, and the vitamins and minerals from the vegetables. So that's an easy change that you can make. But specifically, I try and eat smaller meals throughout the day. So an easy thing for people to do is go to Trader Joe's, or if you want to spend a lot of money, go to Whole Foods. If you haven't guessed, Whole Foods is not my my first choice for anything. Neither is Nugget, because they're very expensive, and there's a lot of choices they have made to appease bigger pharmaceutical companies, which I didn't like. But Trader Joe's is a great one. Sprouts is also a good one. Go and get yourself snacks and make snack sizes of vegetables. Raw vegetables is awesome. Fruit is great. Nuts, beans, all those things can be taken just as raw. Instead of taking potato chips, you take just a little snack here and there. Just raises your blood sugar up enough and then, keeps you satisfied. By the way, what should you never do before you go shopping? Before you go shopping for, not for clothes, but shopping for food. Go on an empty stomach. Because what happens when you go on an empty stomach? Your cart comes out full and it's all filled with terrible things. So eat a good healthy snack before you go shopping and you make better choices scientifically. I mean, one of the things that I told people is if you are a gorge eater, if you tend to eat until you're full, an easy way to satiate yourself before you start eating is eat an apple before every meal. Just take an apple out, eat it, and then guess what? Your portions go way down. Your choices are much better. You're eating a fibrous food that has a very low glycemic index. I mean, easy thing. Maybe you don't like apples. Eat something else. So on your handout, I've included some of the things. Now, the low GI meals here has a low GI, which you want to stick to, medium, and high GI. So the high GI you want to consume rarely, if at all. So, for example, here you've got your sports drink, your fruit juices, French fries, potatoes. What's a good alternative to potatoes? Sweet potatoes. Awesome. Low GI. So potatoes, high index. Sweet potatoes, low index. So white flour, white sugar, white salt, all those things you want to avoid. On this other one, this is a low glycemic shopping list. So this has a lot of the different things that you can get. One of the things that we often recommend is don't eat a lot of bread for a couple of reasons. One is the digestive tract can be really allergic to the glutens that are in bread. Bread is, it really wasn't a God-made food. It was more of a man-made design. But all bread, whether it's whole wheat or Wonder Bread, has a fairly high glycemic index. That's a lot of carbs. So eliminating bread from your diet is, you might think it's really hard, especially if you're addicted to that kind of stuff, but it's actually very easy to do. And so instead of eating a sandwich with the bread, you just eat a sandwich without. Instead of having the burrito with the big flour tortilla, you just eat it in a bowl. And it tastes great, and you don't get that same blood sugar rise. So, so all those things are good. But if you look through this, there's tons of foods you can eat that are good foods, that taste good and all that kind of stuff. Obviously, with certain other conditions, we'll change things. But, start. What I would ask from everyone that comes to my workshop is take one or two things from tonight that you kind of thought about or you learned, that things you can change and work on those changes. Don't try and change everything, and you'll get very good results. Question?
It says on here brown rice. Is that just any brown rice?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. So any brown rice.